Cool.
Reels and Heels is a podcast that discusses movies, television, wrestling, and more, with a rotating...
Tell when I'm at the controls. All right, so welcome to Reels and Heels. Brian, take it away.
Oh yes, and today is starting off really well.
I have to go handle.
Yeah, you go handle. All right, so today we have a special guest. Many of us that grew up in the 80s and 90s will know his name from stuff like Transformers, Gem and Holograms, G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, Tiny Toons Adventures, you name it. He's there. Buzz Dixon, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, Brian. How are you?
I'm great, and we're happy to have you because seriously, you did a lot of our childhood.
Well, I'm happy to be had.
I mean, as little kids, when you're watching cartoons and you see, directed by or written by, you don't know.
Pay
but
attention
then,
to any of that.
as you get older and you start looking, you're like, oh, wow.
Hey, it's important to us to know who wrote certain things, and
well, because it's our childhood. It's like all the things that we remember so fondly about those times when we woke up early on Saturday morning and.
And certain episodes will stick with us, and then when we realize that it's the same person who wrote the same the other show, the other episodes that we liked in other shows, it becomes a pattern.
I liked it so much.
I have to say this off the bat here is that one of my favorite things that you wrote is G.I. Joe the movie.
Oh, well, thank you. I had a bit of a. It took a couple of decades to get come around to, enjoying it the way the fans had, because being there in the room and seeing what could have been done to, in my mind, improve it. I had a great deal of frustration when it didn't come out because, they canceled the distribution deal at the last minute, and I had a great deal of frustration over it. But a few years ago, they had a double feature at the American Cinematheque in Los Angeles at the Egyptian Theater. And they did a double feature of the Transformers movie and G.I. Joe the movie. And it was only the second time that the G.I. Joe movie had ever been shown in front of an audience in the theater. The first time we had a sneak preview at a San Diego Comic-Con, which the projectionist bungled by mixing up two of the reels. So that wasn't, a good experience. But to be in a theater and listening to, about 1,000 or so people reacting to it and enjoying stuff that I had always looked at as, oh, we could have done that better. It made me realize, don't be too harsh on it. Don't, recognize what we did achieve as opposed to, pining over what we might have been able to do. So yeah, I've come to be more accepting of it.
Yeah, I just recently picked it up on Blu-ray, and it's, for as old in the style of animation, it's a little bit better than the DVD, but I think it looks great on Blu-ray.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back, like way back. What was it like for Buzz as a child? What was like your life? I guess cartoons were kind of.
What got you started in cartooning?
Well, what makes you tick? What makes Buzz Dixon tick?
Well,
where does that Buzz?
The easiest way to explain this is that my father worked in women's garments. Now, amplify. He was what you call a time studies engineer in the garment business. If you've ever seen the movie Pajama Game, the musical, there's a character in it, one of the secondary characters, who always goes around with this big clock on his belt. That was the time studies engineer. He was a guy who would time how long it took to make a garment, and then he would figure out how much they could charge based on hourly wages and things like this, how much the labor cost per garment was. And he would try to figure out ways of making the garment more efficiently so you could make the garment faster, thereby spending less labor time on it. My father did this, and he would typically be called into a factory that was having a problem. He'd get it running at maximum efficiency, and then the owners would say, well, wow, you've got everything working at maximum efficiency. The only person we really don't need now is, and so he would lose a job. And we moved constantly as a kid. People have asked me, you move so much, were you in a military family? I said, no. My father just couldn't, keep employment in one place. And we tallied it up, 20 different houses before I graduated from high school. So that gives you an idea of how often we moved. As a result, I'm going to jump a little bit ahead and then I'll come back to my childhood. As a result, I got involved in science fiction fandom because with science fiction fandom at that time, your friends were never any further away than your mailbox. You all subscribed to fanzines, you wrote pen pal letters to each other, and it was a way to stay in touch with people, even though we were being uprooted and moved to a new community like almost every year, or a new neighborhood at least almost every year. So I became involved in science fiction fandom in late 60s, about there. And that happened to be a very volatile time in science fiction because it was the infamous old wave, new wave feud that was going on as the new generation of writers were supplanting the older writers. And there was a huge debate going on as to where science fiction as a genre should go, which ironically still continues to this day. But
this was at the time that Star Trek was just coming out then, right?
Yeah, right. This was about 67, 68. I got my start in fandom through Famous Monsters, because Famous Monsters magazine was very popular. And I'll now go back to my early childhood. I was a huge fan of three things growing up. I was a fan of Donald Duck, Scrooge McDuck comics, and my grandmother and aunt, every time they visit, would bring over a bunch of them. And so I grew up following the storytelling style of Carl Barks, which if you want to know an influence in my life, Carl Barks's way of telling a story was one of them. I was also, like a lot of little kids, enamored of dinosaurs. I had dinosaur books, sticker books, coloring books. I tell people the first book I ever wrote, I wrote before I even knew how to read. Because when I was about 5 years old, I carefully copied the pictures of dinosaurs out of one of my books, copied their names down letter by letter, even though I couldn't read them. And then I stapled the whole thing together. And that was my first book, so to speak. But, even at an early age, I was being, creative, thinking about storytelling and things like this. The third influence was B-Westerns. And people are a little surprised because they say, well, you did so much in science fiction and whatnot. That's true, but I mean, growing up, the B-Westerns were everywhere.
Guys, I'll be right back. I got to deal with my cat, but keep talking, Buzz.
Yeah. So those were my primary influences growing up. And
so when you say Westerns, are we talking like John Wayne Westerns or?
Oh, no. John Wayne was an A-Western. We're talking about Hopalong Cassidy, Roy Rogers, things like that. They were immensely popular on television. Hopalong Cassidy was my favorite. And a few years ago, I got a Hopalong Cassidy movie collection, and I was delighted to find that it had not been a misplaced love, because the Hopalong Cassidy movies were really well produced for B movies. They were really well done, and they can be enjoyed as stories in and of themselves. You don't have to, like with some of the Roy Rogers, you don't have to say, okay, we're going to pretend that, this is the way things were. I mean, I like Roy Rogers movies too. I like Gene Autry films, but a lot of the times you look at them and you just go, well, this is a fantasy. This is not anything that has to do with the real West.
Right.
So anyway, that was an enormous influence. Lone Ranger, that was another show I loved. I got into.
Were you a fan of Zorro?
Oh yes, of course, Zorro. Yeah, Zorro was another one. Just about any Western that B Western that was made, I was into it. I got into sci-fi through the Dinosaurs, because what happened was you read, as a kid, you're looking for any story that has to do with dinosaurs. Carl Barks did a couple of Donald Duck stories where they find either a lost valley or something, and there's a bunch of dinosaurs in it. But the movies that had dinosaurs in them, I would want to see. So I would, pester my parents or my aunt or somebody to take me to see Journey to the Center of the Earth and Dinosaurus and things like that. I get the comic book. The very first comic book I bought with my own dime was the first issue that the Rip Hunter Time Master series started in from DC Comics. I'm going down to the newsstand to look for a comic book, and in my head I'm thinking, I hope they have a Scrooge McDuck. And I go down there looking for a Scrooge McDuck, and here's this guy facing a Triceratops on the cover, and I say, no Scrooge McDuck for me. I want this. And I glommed onto that, and that got me into Godzilla movies. Godzilla movies got me into sci-fi movies in general, monster movies. The monster movies led me to Famous Monsters magazine. And Famous Monsters, because they were kind of a nexus for Monster Kid fans, that got me in contact with the first fanzines that I started writing to, and here I am.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite magazines. Is they had a lot of love for the Universal monsters and and Hammer, the Hammer films. Which, Hammer was basically the UK's version of the Universal monsters. So
a lot bloodier and a lot sexier.
Yeah. But I have a comment here I want to bring up. It's your good old friend Mark. And then we got Rose here.
Okay. Hi, Rose.
So go ahead, Will.
How much research did you do with each of all the characters, which each episode that you wrote for like G.I. Joe or Gem?
Well, I tell people that was one of the great things about being one of the first writers on G.I. Joe was you'd be writing a script and you'd ask somebody, is Roadblock a Rhodes Scholar? He is now. And who's going to say no to you, right? We were lucky specifically with G.I. Joe, but also with Transformers and with Gem. We were lucky to have very talented writers ahead of us do very detailed show Bibles, including biographies of the characters. Larry Hama did this great set of bios for all the Joe characters. Literally every single Joe character, Larry wrote the bios on. And he was doing the comic book at the same time we were doing the series. We deliberately didn't look at what each other was doing. And that was because we recognized independently of one another, we all recognized if we can't imitate the comic and the comic can't imitate us. And so you've got basically two parallel G.I. Joe storylines going here, but more the merrier, right? Yeah. We took his basic character breakdowns and we applied those. as we went along, we discovered new facets of the characters. The voice actors would bring stuff to it that we hadn't suspected in the characters before, but they would bring something up that we could play off of. Classic example is Shipwreck. When we heard Shipwreck being done in Jack Nicholson's voice, we go, yeah, that's it. And Steve Gerber said that he credited me. He said Buzz was the guy who figured out how to write Shipwreck. He said, you write him like Popeye, you play him like Jack Nicholson. And so that's how that character came about. But yeah, we had detailed bios to work on, but then we were given pretty much our head, as long as we didn't do anything that deliberately violated the characters, we could do pretty much anything.
Yeah, and what was cool about both G.I. Joe and Transformers is they shared a lot of the same voice actors.
Oh yeah.
Scatman Crothers, right? Scatman Crothers was on.
Yeah, Wally Burr ran the recording sessions for all of the Sunbow shows. And we had an enormous number of people working for us. And as you say, Scatman Crothers was one of our voices. I was working mostly on G.I. Joe, but every now and then when they would have a shortage or, somebody had missed a deadline on Transformers, they'd ask me to step in and write an episode just to plug the gap. And I would always try to write an episode that had jazz in it, because that gave me an excuse to go down and hang out with Scatman Crothers all day. Just, it was tons of fun. He was a great guy, wonderful guy, always complaining about Stanley Kubrick, though, because he did The Shining, and Kubrick made him cross the street 87 times until he did it exactly the way Kubrick wanted it.
Wow.
He was complaining about that years after making The Shining.
Yeah, I mean, Scatman as a voice artist, he's done a lot of stuff. I mean, I want to say he did some Disney stuff as well.
Oh yeah, Disney, Hanna-Barbera. Yeah. Hanna-Barbera did a show in the late '60s, an hour-long special that was an updated version of Alice in Wonderland. And you might be able to find it on YouTube. It was a musical, and Scatman provided the voice of one of the characters in it, if I recall. And he later re-recorded the Cheshire Cat song in it. It was originally done by Sammy Davis Jr., but Scatman, because they didn't want to pay Sammy royalties, Scatman did a cover of it. But he was Hong Kong Phooey. He was Hong Kong Phooey. I mean, he did an enormous amount of work. He was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. People a lot of times overlook the fact he did like serious, legit theatrical work. He wasn't just a voice actor. Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, people were buying the vinyls, too, of his music stuff. So,
yeah.
So Rose here says she loves Shipwreck. So let me ask you, do you have a favorite Joe?
Well, Shipwreck, obviously. He was the character that you were allowed to break the rules with him, because he was obviously the loose cannon on deck, quite literally, and he was the oddball. He was the one that even the Joes kind of rolled their eyes at, but it gave you a freedom that you wouldn't necessarily get with some of the other characters. If you needed a Joe to do something stupid, Shipwreck was the one you drag in and have him do it.
Yeah, he definitely had a lot of comedic stuff, especially with the bird, going back and forth.
Oh yeah.
So what about on the Cobra side? Do you have a favorite Cobra?
Wow, no. I say that only because we used anything and everything we could get our hands on in those scripts, and sometimes you'd find, this is the perfect story for Cobra Commander, and you'd put him in, and other times you'd go, well, maybe Destro would be a better one here. Possibly Dr. Mindbender. I don't think we ever fully explored what Dr. Mindbender was capable of. We got a little bit into that with Arise, Serpentor, Arise. But someone else made the observation. It says, Dr. Mindbender was always like he was on the verge of screaming insanity. He was always like, just, and I don't think we really exploited that enough. We could have probably had a lot more fun with him. But let's go with Dr. Mindbender on the
Mindbender. So Nicole, let's you want to hop into maybe some of the female cartoons from when you were a kid?
Why do you assume that I just watched the
No,
cartoons?
I know you watched them all. But is there something that you would like to ask that you would want to know about? Maybe Gem and the Holograms, or I mean, you love Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers too.
Oh, just Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, hands down. My favorite cartoon of all time.
So, yeah.
That one and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So.
See,
Yeah,
okay. Being a fan of Gem, I'm a cosplayer, and I'm sure you meet cosplayers all the time, and they tell you what their favorite episode was, and the one episode then they showed it on Saturday morning cartoons of where Pizzazz embodies Gem and makes her into a monster. That that episode has always resonated with me, because that is like like what I just want to know, what celebrity did you get that reference from?
Pretty much all of them. We're in Los Angeles. You get the news and the gossip, and a lot of things were well known that were not publicly known, if you know what I mean. And so you would hear these stories, and you would just, take a little bit here, a little bit there, and you put it all together, and you create, a scene or something that is based on maybe 3 or 4 different actual incidents. Gem was created by Christy Marks, who was just a fabulous writer. She was the only person to turn in a G.I. Joe script where they looked at it and went, you know what, perfect, no editorial, went straight to storyboard and recording. She came up with Gem and the Holograms, did a great job with it. I did, I think, 2 episodes, one in each season of the show. And she's, we stay in contact. We're friends to this day. She's just a wonderful writer, and I can't praise her enough. I tell people she wrote the greatest Amazon warrior graphic novel ever done. It was called Sisterhood of Steel, and if you find it if you're at a convention and you find it in the old graphic novel bin, grab it. It is a good book, really good.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, and I gotta say that Samantha, the voice of Gem, truly loves her fans. She's very social on Twitter and Facebook and all that. She interacts with everybody.
Ironically, I never met her until one of the Granite State cons about 5-6 years ago. And we both were invited. And, the first thing I said to her was, "Hi, I've been putting words in your mouth."
That's funny. So we mentioned Ninja Turtles and Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. You want to tell us how those two fell into your lap?
I forget the exact progression on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was one of the last scripts in that season. I remember it was an odd experience, because when I got the script back, there were an enormous number of superficial changes in it, including in scene descriptions. If I wrote "he goes to the door," they would have changed it to "he walks to the door," and it's like, why are you doing this? And I think the story editor just felt he had to demonstrate he was working, and so he would make a lot of very minor pointless changes throughout. And as I said, it was towards the end of the season. There wasn't any more scripts available after that, so I only got the one. Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. It is always an event to work with the House of Mouse, and they've got a lot of hoops to jump through. Biggest of which is making sure you get paid at the end of the gig. but it was fun. I enjoyed doing it. It was kind of inspired from the episode I did from 101 Dalmatians, because if you remember that movie, the first batch of Dalmatian pups are watching a Rin Tin Tin movie or something on TV in an early scene. And I just thought, well, let's build on that. Let's take the idea of a hero dog who really isn't a hero. And then, you bring in the parrot, which was kind of a nod to Aladdin. And, from there, we came up with the story. Interestingly enough, to make this whole thing come full circle, Disney is now doing a combination live action animated Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers that'll be coming on soon. And my daughter, who is a stand-up comedian, has gotten a role in it in one episode as a school teacher.
Oh, wow.
So
Nice.
Cool.
full circle.
That's cool.
Quiet.
Yeah, I believe that's coming to Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to that. I love how Chip and Dale have their meme that they're based on Magnum PI
Oh yeah, yeah,
and Indiana Jones.
yeah, yeah. We were acutely aware of that when we were working on the show. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Man,
Maybe that's why. I never really thought about it. I was like, maybe that's why. I have a deep affinity for Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers.
well, we know how much you love Tom Selleck and Harrison Ford. So.
yeah, I get an enormous number of guys who, when they're talking about Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, eventually come around to Gadget, and sometimes the conversation gets a little uncomfortable. So.
Yeah. There's
well.
a definite. I try to stay away from that side of the fandom.
Yeah.
But
Our friend Ryan here says he grew up on Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers.
I like Mark's comment up there. The Great Cartoon Wars of 1897.
Yeah, I did bring that one up.
he's at the Olive Garden. Make sure that you
he's-
order more extra breadsticks there, Mark.
Yeah.
If he has the same waitress, I think she'll probably take good care of him.
Yeah. So, Buzz, is there a cartoon or even a show that throughout the years that you've seen that you're like, oh, I wish I wrote that?
There's a lot of movies and occasional TV episodes where I do get that feeling. It's an emotional response because intellectually I go, well, no, I couldn't have written that because every thing that gets written, everything that comes out of a writer reflects what has gone into that writer in one way or another. And you sometimes are envious that somebody found an avenue, an angle of attack. Somebody's found an insight that you wouldn't have thought about. But you shrug it off and you go, well, I'm finding stuff that they're not finding. So, yeah, there are movies, there are shows that I look at and I kind of wistfully say, yeah, I wish I had done that. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, for instance, it's like a love letter to 1970s Los Angeles. And
Yeah.
that would be a lovely credit to have if you had come up with that. So.
Yeah.
Here's an example.
And it's funny that you bring that up because I know I follow you on Facebook and stuff, and I know you're a huge film fan. And there in Los Angeles, with the pandemic and stuff, one of the most probably famous theaters in the world, the company which is the Arclight, it closed, the Cinerama Dome.
Well, it looks like they have got a buyer who will reopen it, which is good news because there are only 3 Cinerama theaters left in the world, apparently. And there's no place else to see these classic Cinerama movies anymore unless you go to the Arclight or one of these other theaters. I was there with Mark Evanier and a few other people either last year or the year before when they did their annual screening of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And the Cinerama experience when it is done properly, is a much bigger and better experience than a conventional theater. I've seen It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World on television numerous times. I've got the Criterion disc, which they try to recreate the original cut as close as they possibly can. And even on a big screen TV, it doesn't play nearly as well as it plays on a big 80-foot projection screen. And that's because the director, Stanley Kramer, was really incredibly good at knowing how to time things for a big Cinerama screen. He figured out what the beats were. And so you watch it on television, and it seems to me it's a little slow paced on TV. You watch it on that 80-foot screen, and things that seem to move slowly on a TV screen, they're zipping across at an 80-foot screen. And I'm glad that it sounds like they're finding somebody who's going to pick that up and keep it operating. I'm sad the Arclight organization appears to be going under, because the Arclight really had good presentations of films. I mean, they throw you out of the theater if you were making noise. They would just did a really professional job of running their theaters. But what are you going to do? Pandemic.
Yeah, it is sad as a film fan to learn that they were closing, and then the Dome, which, like I said, is like not just for movie fans, but it's like when you go to Los Angeles, it's one of the most Los Angeles things in Los Angeles.
Yeah. Have you seen an aerial shot directly down on it? I mean, it looks like a flying saucer has landed in the middle of town.
Yeah, I know when the Godzilla film opened a few years ago, they had a giant Godzilla head on top of it, and it looked like Godzilla was busting out of it, which was really cool. And then you talked about how the company Arclight is very high class, and they had really like there are strict rules. They showed only 3 movie trailers, and then you got your movie, not like 30 minutes of trailers and then a movie. Yeah. And then he talks about, if you're loud or whatever, there's no, there's like, you're out of here.
Yeah. I really get annoyed going into movie theaters where now you've got like an hour of commercials between the movies, and it's not even go down to the lobby and buy some popcorn. It's like local businesses, things like that. And it's like, if I want to watch commercials, I'll go home and turn on the TV,
Right. Yeah. But that is something to go back to, talking about how movies are on the big screen compared to home. Like, it doesn't matter if you have like a 75 or an 80-inch TV, you still can't get that shared experience that you can at a movie theater.
Right.
And, seeing movies, you talk about how you loved Dinosaurs growing up. So when the original Jurassic Park came out, that was something that I'm sure you were like in awe of, even though it came out later in your life. But the dinosaur kid was still in you.
Oh, yeah.
That's something that you need to see on the big screen. So do you remember when Jurassic Park came out?
I remember when it came out. I didn't see it when it was initially released, though, because, my wife and I, we had kids of our own. We had the, other issues that we were dealing with. We didn't go to theaters as often at that point as we had done previously. And now, thanks to the pandemic and a sale on big screen TVs at Costco, we feel even less inclination to go to theaters. But I'll tell you, I'll give you 2 stories out of my childhood about dinosaur movies. I'll tell the second one first. My father would take me to these movies when they came out. And oddly enough, my father became a bit of a Godzilla movie fan because he saw how cheesy they were, and he kind of liked the cheesiness. It tickled him no end in one Godzilla movie where the monsters are fighting and they start an avalanche, and the bad guy catches a boulder and then realizes, oops, I'm not supposed to catch this, am I? And he falls backwards, but he actually catches it for a moment and then realizes I'm supposed to fall. And that tickled my father no end. He enjoyed that. But the second story, he took my brother and I, my brother Rick, who's about 4 years younger than I am, he took us to see Gorgo, which is like a really good giant monster movie out of England. Is one of the best kaiju movies ever made, and it's arguably the best that wasn't made in Japan. And my father, at the end, when Mama Gorgo is coming to rescue her son, he's got to go to the bathroom. So he just gets up and he goes to the bathroom, and Mama Gorgo is laying waste to London. And my brother reaches over to grab my father, and he's not there, and he just goes hysterical. He's crying, he's yelling for my father. I'm trying to shut him up and at the same time keep my eye on Gorgo, what's going on. And my father finally comes back and calmed him down. But that was one memory. Earlier than that, he took us, oddly enough, in the middle of the week to see Dinosaurs. And Dinosaurs was it was a movie made for little Buzz Dixon, because it's about this construction crew in Puerto Rico that finds 2 frozen dinosaurs and a caveman. Yeah, frozen Puerto Rico. Just roll it, folks, okay? Come on. Dinosaurs, one from the Triassic, one from the Jurassic, and a caveman, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, they find these 3, and they thaw out. They get struck by lightning. They come to life, and they're roaming around the island. They're fighting each other, and in the end, there's a steam shovel and Tyrannosaurus Rex fight at the end of it. It's just like, if you're 6 years old and you're into dinosaurs and you're into construction equipment, this is the movie.
You're an overload.
Right, an overload. And my mother had just given birth a couple of weeks earlier to my brother Robert, and so she needed some time just by herself. And so Dad left her and Robert at the house, and he took Rick and myself and one of my school friends in the middle of the week to see Dinosaurs. The theater that we went to, I don't know who the lunatic was who thought it would be a good idea to run a trailer for Mario Bava's Black Sunday.
Oh.
But, we're sitting here eager for the Dinosaurs, and they put up this trailer for one of the quintessential great Italian horror films. And the trailer consisted of every nightmarish image out of that movie that they could find, just packed into 90 seconds. And you've got to imagine a theater full of little kids up there, and it's just like, oh my God, what are they doing to that? Why are they driving the mask with the stakes into her face? And then the infamous scene where the eyeballs come floating up into the skull. Oh. And well,
oh wow,
that got me interested in horror films. So.
Do you like Italian horror films?
Oh, I love them. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Mario Bava, Dario Argento, Fulci. Sometimes they get ridiculously excessive, and I dislike movies where there is no soul to them, so to speak, where they just go, okay, well, if they chopped off a limb in this other movie, we'll chop off 2 limbs in this one. Where it's just done as mechanically. I really enjoyed Italian horror films. In fact, one of the earliest Italian horror films that I saw, science fiction films, happened to be made by Mario Bava. It's known in America as Caltiki, the Immortal Monster. And it's essentially the Blob if the Blob was an Aztec god. So you've got a little bit of Cthulhu, you got a little bit of Aztec in here, you've got the Blob. And Bava, who was a cinematographer, there's an enormous amount of special effects in here that you don't realize until you're older and you know what to look for. This is like one of the most special effects laden movies anybody ever made. And Bava just made this really great film. And of course, in the American version, he's not credited because to disguise the fact it was an Italian movie, they gave everybody in the cast and crew, Anglo-sounding names.
Yeah.
But, I watched that on TV countless times as a little kid. It was a great movie.
Yeah, I am a fan of the Italian films because a lot of them are more artsy.
Oh yeah.
Compared to the American horror film.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, one of my favorite films is Suspiria. I mean,
oh yes, my goodness, yes.
Yeah. So I'm looking here in the chat, and we have a few questions for you. So, I mean, you kind of answered this, but Ryan wants to know favorite movies or TV series.
It depends on what day of the week it is, but generally, in terms of favorite movies, Casablanca typically is at the top of the list because that is, in my mind, the absolute best example of the Hollywood studio system at work. Probably Seven Samurai follows after that. You can then throw in La Dolce Vita by Federico Fellini. There's a French film called Les Enfants du Paradis, Children of Paradise, which is described as the French Gone with the Wind. It is set in 1840s French theatrical district. It is just this incredibly rich, opulent movie. And it was shot during the Nazi occupation. That's the other incredible thing. They snuck in, some really subversive stuff right under the Nazis' noses in this movie. And there are others that, like I said, it depends on what day of the week it is, and they'll vary. But those 4 or 5 are always typically near the top. TV series, probably The Prisoner is my all-time favorite TV series. I'm a huge fan of Mystery Science Theater 3000. I've got all the Comedy Central and Sci-Fi Channel things on DVD that I burned them off the air when they were being broadcast. There's an old TV show, you might find some of the episodes on YouTube, called THE Cat, that starred Robert Loggia. It was a 30-minute suspense show. And it just an incredible show, just very taut, nerve-wracking type of suspense show. And it was on at 10:30 on Friday nights. So the people who could have made it a hit, the audience that could have made it a hit, they were out, at clubs or at concerts or doing other things. WKRP in Cincinnati, Dick Van Dyke Show, Mary Tyler Moore Show. These were all great sitcoms that had an enormous influence on me. Dick Van Dyke Show in particular had a huge influence. In fact, I would say virtually every TV writer in my generation would say the Dick Van Dyke Show, was one of the things that spurred them on to becoming a writer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Recently, I've been rewatching older shows like Columbo and The Rockford Files.
Yeah.
2 shows, even as a kid, I would watch. Yeah. Which, I mean, at the time, kids watching shows like that in my generation is probably unheard of. But I like stuff like that. I like MASH.
Yeah.
I don't think it was unheard of because I think we watched a lot of the things our parents were watching.
Yeah.
But watching that stuff when we were kids was a lot less I'm trying to think of the word, a lot less controversial than kids watching some of the stuff we watch now. Like our kids watching the stuff that we watch. Like, how much murder can one kid watch?
Yeah. Hey, I used to watch Murder, She Wrote all the time with my mom. So.
Yeah, but that was different. It was a different, like Murder, She Wrote and Matlock and Columbo and all of those shows back then.
Heart to Heart.
Were a heck of a lot different than, say, Criminal Minds now. Like,
yeah, but
I jumped out of my skin the other night watching Criminal Minds.
Look at a show like The Rifleman. Okay, somebody did a body count on YouTube of The Rifleman. I think The Rifleman, Chuck Connors, kills 500 people in the course of this show. This man is a murder machine. Okay, and as a kid, you're watching this show, and it doesn't dawn on you that there's a real emotional weight to killing another human being. It became very trivialized. I'll jump ahead here. One of my first places that I worked, in fact, the first place I worked in animation was Filmation Studios. And at Filmation, their live action producer and director was Arthur Nadell, wonderful, sweet guy. Arthur had been one of the directors on The Rifleman. The other director was this guy named Sam Peckinpah. And so they would alternate episodes. And so you'd watch The Rifleman as a kid, and one episode, the boy, I forget he just died recently, unfortunately, but the young man playing Lucas's son come and said, "Dad, there's a kid cheating at school and I don't know what to do about it." "Well, son, you got to do," and this heart to heart, story. And then the next week, the Wild Bunch comes into town. He's just like blasting people off the roofs of buildings. It was a very schizophrenic show. And you could tell which ones were Sam Peckinpah's and which ones were Arthur's. So,
yeah. So to jump back into your career a little bit before we go into these other questions, you said Funimation. So that was
Filmation.
Filmation. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
What was going on there at that time? Cartoon-wise.
That's how I got my job.
That's how you got your job.
I had been in the Army for 6 years. At the end of my enlistment, the Army and I decided we should see other people. I came out to Los Angeles with my wife and our older daughter. She was 3 at the time. My daughter, not my wife. We came back. I had applied to USC's film school and had been accepted, but the film school didn't start until October, and I was discharged in February. So we come to Los Angeles, and I decided I'm going to try to find a job at a studio in the mail room or as a driver or something like that, just to get my feet wet so that when I start film school, I have a little bit of real world experience, in the Hollywood system. So I started Universal Studios and with my resume, and I'm literally working my way down the list. And about 99 on a list of 100 was Filmation Studios. I gone through all of them. I get down to Filmation Studios, and I go in to drop off my resume, and the receptionist says, "Well, are you applying for a job in live action or in animation?" I don't know anything about animation. So I say, "Well, live action, I guess." And she says, "Wait a moment." And she goes in the back and she comes out and says, "Arthur will see you." What I didn't know was this. In animation, there is a 1 to 3 month gap, or there used to be a 1 to 3 month gap period called hiatus season. And that was when you had finished productions on the previous season's shows, but the networks weren't ready to buy shows for the next season. And during that period of time, they would, turn people loose. The studio would be a virtual ghost town. There'd only be a skeleton crew on. Arthur was sitting in the back with nothing to do. And, the receptionist comes in. There's this guy up here with a resume. He's looking for a job. And Arthur goes, "Send him back. Anything to kill an afternoon." So I go back to see Arthur, and as I said, wonderful, sweet guy, just one of the nicest people you could ever hope to meet. We start talking. I give him a little bit about my background. I mentioned I had been a information specialist and a newspaper editor when I was in the Army. I mentioned also I had written short stories. Hadn't sold any at that time, but I had written a few. And he said, "Well, if you're ever back in the neighborhood, I'd love to take a look at some of your short stories." Well, you don't have to hit me over the head, So I dug out some of my short stories from our suitcases. I bring them in, drop them off, and he thanks me. And then he very casually says, "We're working on this idea for a show. We're having problems coming up with story ideas." He said, "Now, I can't ask you to write any story ideas, but if you, on your own, were to come up with a few and want to pitch them to me, I'd be happy to listen." Again, don't have to hit me over the head. Go back to where we were staying. I drag my typewriter out. I come up with about 6 or 8 ideas. The next week, I bring them in to Arthur. What I didn't know was this. Arthur read my short stories and sent them by FedEx to Lou Scheimer, who was one of the guys who ran Filmation Studios, who was on vacation in Hawaii. You got to remember, this is 1978. Sending something overnight by FedEx to Hawaii is a big deal at that time. I had no idea this was going on. He sends my short stories to Lou. And about the same time, I come in with, these premises that I've developed for the show they're trying to get up and running. And he accepts the premises. And when Lou comes back from vacation, my premises are sitting on his desk. And he tells Arthur, he says, well, I don't know who we should hire. Should we hire the guy that wrote the short stories, or should we hire the guy that wrote the premises? And Arthur said, they're the same guy. And Lou said, get him. And so Arthur calls me up and says, would you like to write a script for us? And they gave me a tryout script, which incidentally, 20, 30 years later, I dug this thing up. I found it in my one of my boxes, and I reread it, and it is absolutely the worst animation script I have ever read in my life. But it got me the gig, and I got on staff at Filmation. I lasted about a season and a half there. They kept me on for one hiatus season, and I was, when October rolled around and it was time to go to film school, I just said to myself, well, you're making a living now. You're actually writing cartoons. You're making enough to support your wife and daughter. Go to film school next year. Next year never came. So, I just kept writing for animation, and that's how I ended up here on this show.
That's awesome.
Oh man. And so this was, you said 78. So this was just a few years before He-Man blew up.
Oh yeah. This was about the era of Tarzan and the Super 7. There was another show we did called The Fabulous Funnies, where amusing story on that. The Fabulous Funnies were based on comic strips and old comic strips like the Katzenjammer Kids and Alley Oop, stuff like that. What kids are reading these today? I remember asking Lou, but they had got these. But one of the comic strips they supposedly had was a strip called Tumbleweeds by an artist named T.K. Ryan. And I love Tumbleweeds. It was this send-up of the Old West. It was hilarious. It had a great cast of characters in it. And I figured out a workaround for a problem they were having with voice actors, because they originally thought they couldn't have any Native American characters in it because they would have to hire Native American voice actors. And the only Native American voice actor that anybody knew would have been Iron Eyes Cody. And of course, the joke there is he was Sicilian. But I said, well, they've got two mute Indian characters, tribe members in the comic strip. Just use them as the only two Native American characters. And so Lou let me write about 4 episodes, or I was supposed to write about 4 episodes. I wrote the first one. It was in the first episode of the series that aired. And the following Monday, we got a phone call from T.K. Ryan's lawyer who said he really liked the show. He's wondering why you guys never offered him a contract.
Wow.
Filmation's lawyer had approached Ryan and said, we'd like to do Tumbleweeds as a segment of the show. And Ryan said, great, send me a storyboard so I can see what you plan to do with it. And if I like it, I'll say yes. And the lawyer came back and said, he said yes. And we put this show on the air without any contract.
Now, you strike me as someone who likes consistency in your stories and your projects that you do. Like when you come into contact with other writers, do you ever call them out on their mistakes of inconsistencies?
Oh, it depends on which hat I'm wearing at the time. If I've got my story editor hat on, yes, I will point out inconsistencies, because part of my job as the story editor is to make things as consistent as we possibly can. On the other hand, if we're just, spitballing ideas around the table and somebody all of a sudden wants to make, Roadblock a Rhodes Scholar, unless there's a really compelling reason not to, you just go, okay, fine, we'll do it that way. I got into a huge argument, myself and Michael Reeves, who is another stalwart of animation. Michael was the story editor on a show called Mighty Orbots. I wrote, I think, 3 episodes of that. And we got into this huge fight with Freddie Silverman, who was like the head of children's programming at whatever network it was at that time. And my script had this magnetic monster that the Orbots were fighting. And in my script, the Orbots drag the monster up to a volcano and throw him in. And Silverman says, I don't like that. He says, let's have him thrown into a glacier instead. And Michael and I go, well, no, magnetism doesn't work that way. If you make a magnet hot, you destroy its magnetic properties. If you make a magnet super cold, you only make the magnetism stronger. No, I want him in a glacier. It's the same paint cost, whatever we do. It's the same amount of paint. It doesn't matter if it's a volcano or a glacier. Just throw him in the volcano. It makes sense. No, I want him in the glacier. And it was just I want it and I'm going to get it and I don't care. And, if that's the attitude you're approaching the material with, you're going to have bad shows because it is no longer what makes sense, what works. There's no longer a sense of obligation to the audience. There would be visually no difference between one and the other in the final effect. Okay, one's a red background, one's a white background. That's it. But because Silverman was such a person that he couldn't tolerate any dissension, he couldn't tolerate being told it's actually better to do it this way. He pushes through, something that we didn't need. It's one of those things where you think, well, just give it to them. I mean, you need the writers to be enthusiastic about the show. Go, okay, fine, throw them in a volcano. Nobody would remember it 5 minutes later. But to him, it was such an assault on his ego.
He hated to be wrong.
Yeah, he hated to be challenged. He was wrong all the time. I mean, he was just one of the most colossally wrong people in the history of TV. You get runs and just the cards are dealt in your favor and it's like, wow, this is great. And you have to recognize it's just random. It's the cards being dealt in your favor and the card deck will go cold at some point. Mm-hmm. And if you think I'm winning because I am such a wonderful person and I'll always keep winning, then you're going to get clobbered when the deck turns cold. If you're sitting there going, at some point, this deck will turn cold, be ready for it. When it turns cold, then you go, okay, all right, time to walk away from this game, find another game to play in. And Silverman was not capable of recognizing that, and he kept sinking tons of money into bad shows. Super Train, do you remember that one?
Yeah.
He one of the shows that he produced was called The Lottery, if I remember, something like that. And it was a modern variation of an old show called The Millionaire, where somebody gives away $1 million. In The Lottery, 3 or 4 different people, you follow the stories as they win that week's lottery and they have a ton of money. And in one of the segments, there is a pregnant woman who is trapped in an elevator and she's giving birth. And she's wearing pantyhose while she's supposedly giving birth. This is Silverman's attention to detail, okay? This is the type of crap that went on in the shows. And, let's get off of Silverman.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't mean to bring up a sore subject.
So,
There's a can of worms for you.
So before we hop into the second half of the show here, I want to show this promo that our good friend John B. Pica made for us. and we're gonna have a lot more of these played. And I had to just show you because I still love this so much.
Hey there, friends and foes. This is John Pica, the prophet of pop culture. I'm the host of the Back of the Cereal Box podcast, but right now you are watching and listening to one of the best shows on the internet. Ooh, yeah, Reels and Heels. Dig it!
Oh, man. I asked him yesterday to make that, and he was like, "Yep." And then, like, within 30 minutes, he sent it back to me. I was like, "That's awesome."
I can't do that. Like, I can't recreate. Like, if I make up a voice, I can't recreate it. So it's like, can you do that again? No. Sorry. I can never make any money from it.
Yeah, we've had voice actors like that where they do something and, oh, can you do it again? No. You just got to hope they get it right the first time.
I don't know what I was doing. I don't know how I was holding my face, whatever. I don't know.
Okay. So when you were on Saturday morning cartoons, Mark had brought up a show called Bionic 6, which I do remember that cartoon. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? That
was done at the same studio that did Mighty Orbots. It was TMS, Tokyo Movie Shinsha. TMS had done a number of really good anime shows in Japan, and they were always looking to crack the American market. They were the original studio behind Lupin 3, for instance. Okay, so they were really top-notch stuff. And I got a gig there doing Mighty Orbots. They liked my work enough that they brought me back on staff to do development. I was there at the same time they were doing the Little Nemo movie, so I got to meet and become friends with Ray Bradbury because he was working on that. I mean, that was a great experience. Ray was another one of the. I've been very lucky to meet a lot of very wonderful people in my life, and Ray was just a sweetheart. Bionic 6, I think I did 4 or 5, maybe 6 episodes. I can't really recall. I do know I did one where I brought a audio animatronic giant whale to life in a museum and just had this thing flopping after him. It was a pretty nice show. They animated it really well. But the Tokyo Movie Shinsha had a unique set of circumstances. Because of Japanese labor laws, they had to have a Japanese story editor on their show. And they would have an American story editor because it's a show being made for the American market. So on Bionic 6, on Mighty Orbots, Michael would be the American story editor, and I forget the name of the Japanese story editor. And they hated each other. The Japanese story editor was fluent in English, but it was a matter of pride. He would never speak English to an American. So he had to have this poor woman who was a translator sitting in on these meetings. So you got to picture this. You've got this huge conference table. And on one side, you have this, like pissed off Yakuza looking guy with, he wasn't Yakuza, but I'm just giving you a feel. With this very polite Japanese, middle-aged Japanese lady sitting beside him. On the other side, you've got Michael and myself, and Michael is probably the only guy who was more of a hothead at that time than I was. And the Japanese woman would translate and say, he thinks it would be a good idea if maybe we did this. And Michael's like, we can't do that. That's stupid. And she speaks very meekly to him, and the Japanese guy, he thinks maybe we should consider. And this goes on for hours on every show. And the woman halfway through the series quit TMS and joined a commission, an international commission that was negotiating a fishing treaty between Japan, the United States, and the Soviet Union. She thought that was an easier gig.
Oh my God. Oh man, I can. Oh,
Oh my god.
that was a great story.
I've worked some pretty crappy jobs, but I don't think that, I don't know. That one sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, there was some really odd stuff at TMS, I got to say. I mean, and not bad odd, just odd. We had an American, middle-aged American woman who was our receptionist because they wisely decided they should have someone familiar with American idiom answering the phones. And one time at lunch, we were just, hanging around, having lunch, talking, and somehow the topic of the X-rated parody Flesh Gordon came up. And the receptionist, and you got to imagine, this is like a middle-aged mom-looking receptionist. She goes, "Oh yeah, I was in that." I said, "Really?" And I said, "Out of curiosity, where were you in it?" I'm thinking she's like in a background scene or something. And she says, "You know the scene where they lose the power pasty?" Now, anybody listening to this, if you haven't seen Flesh Gordon, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Those of you who have, you know exactly what I'm talking about. She says, "You know the scene where they lose the power pasty?" And I said, "Yeah." And she says, "That was me."
Nice.
Okay. This story almost started like a story that would come from, my middle school classroom. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
We rented the wrong movie. Stop, man.
I want to show them my cool creation.
I'll take a look. Show them some of the cool creation.
I was saying, I pay attention to my child, but for some reason, it's not enough.
Okay. Very nice. Yeah.
I mean, they build Bionicles and Legos and stuff. Like, we have a 20-gallon Tupperware bin of Legos that used to be stuff, and I don't know what they used to be, but we have a million Legos.
Yeah. Well, at least it's a 20-gallon bin of Legos and not gasoline.
Yeah.
Well, I would have been able to get to school the other day.
No, actually, that's what the garbage bags are for.
Is it like, I'm up in Canada, so I haven't had that issue yet where it's becoming pandemonium. Sorry, I can't speak, but over gas. Has it been affecting you guys?
Not really. Our gas prices locally have gone up a bit, but they were due to go up anyway because once the pandemic, started lifting, people were driving more, businesses were reopening. The craziness seems to be in Florida and South Carolina primarily, and this is just human stupidity. The pipeline itself, the physical pipeline, was not shut down. They shut down the program that controlled it. They're now controlling it manually. So they're still making gas. They're still pumping gas. These idiots, they get the same idea in their head with, the toilet paper and paper towels. And toilet paper and paper towels, that makes sense because you're thinking, well, if I've got to be locked in for a month, I want to make sure I've got an adequate supply of toilet paper. That makes sense. But running out and buying gasoline because it might be cut off, and then you think, well, at least take a gas can with you, something that you can actually store and transfer the gas. Trash bags? and they're like not even big sturdy trash bags. They're getting like shopping bags from Vaughn's or something, and they're double bagging and filling it up, and it's like, that's 2.5 gallons of gas. You're going to save $1.50 here if gas prices go up.
Yeah, and the gas in a bag is going to go bad anyway. So
yeah, and how do you plan to get it into your tank? You got to have a nozzle. They're just not thinking this out.
I guess they're learning how to siphon.
I just wanted to get to work the one day. So I just wanted to find a gas station that had gas that I could pull into and pay for $20 worth of gas. I didn't have a can. I didn't have anything. I just had my car. I just want to put it in my gas tank and go to work. That's it.
Yeah.
Four gas stations. And I'm like, you people are, well, first of all, they're stupid because one, the pipeline doesn't even supply our gas here in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you guys,
the gas station, this is what they told me when I went up there yesterday and they had gas. They said they have a shortage of truck drivers. That's the issue.
That was another thing that was discussed as well, but I just thought it was bizarre.
Yeah, see, our gas comes by ship into Tampa.
Yeah.
So
somebody posted something the other day on Facebook that I think sums it up adequately, but they said basically humanity is divided into two groups. There's the one group that will only take one piece of pizza to make sure everybody has a chance of getting a piece of pizza. And there's the other group that'll take 3 pieces of pizza because they don't think there's enough to go around for everybody. And that's pretty much what we got here.
Yeah. So all fairness and all kindness has gone completely out the window.
Mm-hmm. They watch too many Mad Max movies,
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Everything is dystopian and apocalyptic now.
Yeah.
Everything that we watch on TV, it seems like. So now everybody's like, oh my God, what if this really happens? What will it be like?
But that's really happening. That's the thing.
Most of those
Anarchy,
movies that we see, like the horror movie, The Purge, and the Mad Max movies, really, I don't think anything like that will happen. Or, I mean...
I enjoy the visual aspects of the Mad Max movies. I know enough about maintaining vehicles, even though that was not my specialty in the military. I know enough about maintaining vehicles, about the support you need to maintain the vehicles, and the support you need to support the support to maintain the vehicles, that I'm watching these things and I'm going, there is no way you can have this level of activity with motor vehicles operating off of gasoline, even if you happen to have a functioning oil well, for as long as they are depicting it, in these movies. You've got gaskets to replace, you've got tires to replace, you have wiring, you have batteries, you have all this stuff. It all requires a large, intricate infrastructure, and it requires a great deal of cooperation. People don't want to admit that. They want to have this fantasy where, it's like the Omega Man. You need a new car, you just go down to the dealership, you drive through the window in a brand new Cadillac, and then, come home and shoot up a few zombies. It's not going to be like that. They don't seem to grasp this.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's see here. Here's a question Ryan has for you. What classic show should be rebooted and why?
That's a good question.
It is. And I have 2 answers. One answer is none of them, because if they were good, they should be kept as pristine examples of what they were. Dick Van Dyke Show. You cannot recreate the Dick Van Dyke Show. You will never get that gestalt again. Don't even try. Do something else. You can be inspired by it, but don't try to reboot the Dick Van Dyke Show. On the other hand, if you're going to reboot something, don't reboot something good. Reboot something that had potential and either failed to find its audience or failed to capitalize on that potential. I'll go back to THE Cat. I think you could easily do a show like THE Cat about this guy who was a former circus acrobat turned cat burglar turned bodyguard, who now is in these incredibly dangerous situations protecting people. And you could take that core idea and you could reinterpret it. You could, It's obviously not the same character, but you could bring it back. But they tried revamping The Prisoner, and it was like, you rarely get remakes that are as good or better than the original. One of the very few exceptions are the Star is Born movies. Because the very first movie in that series was called What Price Hollywood. And they remade it a few years later as A Star is Born because they recognized what the narrative flaw was in What Price Hollywood. What Price Hollywood has a happy ending, and it just rings false. It's a nice movie, but it just rings false. They gave it a tragic ending and turned it into A Star is Born, huge hit for Janet Gaynor. It was remade a few years later with Judy Garland as a musical, another huge hit because they added another layer onto it, the music layer. It was remade 20 years after that, 20, 30 years after that with Barbra Streisand. She tried. And then it lay fallow for a long time until they did the Lady Gaga version. And that one, which I haven't seen yet, but everybody who's seen it.
It's very good.
Very good.
My issue with it feels like the song is unfinished. I listen to it and it's like it feels like there's something missing with it.
I get that feeling out of a lot of movies, to be honest with you, and I don't know whether it's the studio executives not knowing how a story is structured and they allow incomplete work to get done, or whether it's just they run out of time. There's it's kind of like the David Lynch version of Dune. I always felt the first third was twice as long as it should have been, and the last third should have been twice as long as it was. That they had their pacing and the story plot points just imperfectly arranged.
Right. Anyway. I did like the TV version with John Hurt. I thought that one was decent. I do look forward to this new one because I am a fan of the director. I mean, I thought his Blade Runner 2049 was a masterpiece. I actually liked it better than the original Blade Runner. And then, of course, his film Prisoners, so good. Yeah.
I saw the Blade Runner sequel, and I still have a greater fondness for the original, and I thought there were some visual design inconsistencies because the computer generated portions did not look like they belonged in the same world with the live action portions. But that was relatively minor. I enjoyed it,
Right. What about what do you think of stuff like on the TV side, like Magnum PI, which I thought they kept the story similar. They just, of course, modernized it. I don't know if you've seen.
Let me head you off here. I watch very little series television nowadays, and part of the reason is I've got my own projects that I'm working on, and I actually prefer to be writing than watching something. Another is I just don't like investing large hunks of time in something if I don't know it has a definite end. When The Queen's Gambit came on, I watched that because I knew, okay, 6 episodes, it's over. I'll commit to 6. First season of Luke Cage, love that show. I really enjoyed it. Didn't have to watch another Luke Cage episode after that. I had gotten my Luke Cage fill. My wife loves, these crime shows, murder mystery shows. I'll occasionally drift down, while she's watching, and I'll watch one with her. The last one that we watched the Poirot, the Hercule Poirot series we watched consistently together. She watched much more of them than I did. We also watched The Father Browns, and I love The Father Browns because The Father Browns did something you almost never see in television. If you're familiar with the Father Brown concept, He is a crime-solving priest in a small English community. And because he's a priest, he is not allowed to tell the authorities what he has learned. He has to maintain that confidentiality. But he will tell the murderer, says, this is what you did. I figured it out. I know what happens. To cleanse your soul, you need to confess to the police. 9 times out of 10, he gets them to confess to the police. On the 10th time, the guy says, sayonara, sucker, and he splits. I go, yeah, all right, that would happen. I absolutely believe that. So, it's interesting to watch the show, wondering, well, is this going to be one that gets away or not? So,
yeah, I don't know if you've seen this. It's on Netflix and it's been there for a while. I don't think they're coming back for another season. Is Mindhunters. Very good writing. If you have a chance.
Is this the profiler one?
Yes.
Okay. The first season, they get what's his name, Kemper, the big guy.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
My wife and I, we watched that. We're watching it, and we're looking at this guy, Kemper. This was based on a real psychopath who's still kept locked up. We're watching it, and my wife and I are both going, my God, he looks just like I did, 20 years ago.
But, yeah, it's David Finch.
Yeah.
Who did, Gone Girl, which,
God,
that movie was, Ben Affleck, that movie was awesome.
Enjoy your nap.
Yeah.
So Ryan has another question here for you.
That's a good question.
Thoughts on Beast Wars in the 90s?
I have no questions. I suck at this.
I'm going to disappoint you, Ryan, because one of the things that I do as a writer is that when I leave a project, I put it down and I walk away from it. And I do this for my own mental health. Because if I sit there going, oh, they ruined it, they wrecked what I did, they did this, they did that, the other thing, I'll go crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm done, I put it down, I walk away. I never watched an episode of Deke's G.I. Joe. They called me up. They asked if I wanted to write for them. I said, sure. I gave them a price. They said, oh, we can't meet that. And I never heard from them again. Fine. I begrudge no one who worked on the show. I begrudge no one who enjoyed the show. But I just went, I'm down, I'm done, I walk away. And it's like that with Transformers. I am truly happy that people still remember the original Transformers series and they enjoy it. I am happy that it had all these spin-offs that people, each spin-off has its own enthusiastic fandom. More power to everybody who, enjoys whatever aspect of Transformers or G.I. Joe or anything that they enjoy. I don't try to keep track of everything. So, as I said, when I'm done, I'm done. I put it down. I walk away.
That's I completely get that.
Can understand that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard this, especially about Beast Wars. The writing of that series, it was really good.
I'm sure. I'm being honest. To keep my own sanity.
Yep. I think it also helps the fact that they had consistency, the same writers, same group of writers writing for every season.
That is a huge help to have at least a core pool that you can rely on, who understands the basic parameters of the show. You always need to have freelancers come in, because freelancers will see something you don't see, and they can pitch something that's different and fresh. We used quite a few freelancers in the second season of G.I. Joe because we didn't want to get stale. We didn't want to keep repeating the same, Cobra's got a MacGuffin and they're going to do this and we got to stop them. We wanted people to come in and pitch ideas that were,
stuck to the chair.
Better. Yeah.
So I want to bring this up because I don't think this cartoon gets talked about a lot. I remember watching it, and that's the Mr. T cartoon.
Oh, yeah. Mr. T, I wrote one episode. I think I just wrote one episode. Maybe I wrote two. I don't know. But I made more money off of Mr. T than any other show because we had a live action opening and closing to the show. And the live action opening and closing was covered by Writers Guild regulations. So I actually made more money off of the 3 minutes of live action of Mr. T going, "Watch the show, fool!" And every time it was rerun, that's, they'd send me another check. That show, the biggest problem with it was we had 17 characters, and every character had to have at least one line of dialogue in every episode. So by the time you finished giving every character a line of dialogue, the show was pretty much over. And it was the challenge was figuring out how to construct the stories in such a way that everybody gets their line of dialogue without, derailing what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, I remember this cartoon, and they were trying to do a lot of cartoons based on they did the Karate Kid cartoon. There was the Chuck Norris cartoon. A lot of people forgot, and even Rambo had his own cartoon.
Yeah. What had happened was when the floodgates were open on syndicated animation, they were rushing to make deals, and we had far more animation than the market could sustain, and so then you had a collapse. My father, oddly enough, told me, warned me about this when I was a teenager, not about TV, but he said, in the garment business, the first guy to come up with a new design makes a ton of money. The next two people to imitate that design, they make a lot of money. And then everybody who tries imitating them, they're lucky to break even. Yeah. And that's pretty much what happened with animation. You mentioned He-Man earlier. He-Man and Transformers and G.I. Joe were among the first regularly scheduled syndicated shows that use what is called the barter system. The barter system was this: a toy company would fund a show, and then they would take the show to individual local stations and say, "We will give you a half hour of animation as long as we get half the commercials on." So if you watch G.I. Joe, you would see half the commercials were ads for other Hasbro toys. You weren't allowed to advertise G.I. Joe, but you could advertise Transformers, whatever. And then, of course, with the Transformers show, they're advertising G.I. Joe. Half the commercials would go to Hasbro. The other half would be local commercials. So you're essentially telling a local station, we're going to give you a free half hour, and you get to sell advertising, on half of it. And they're going to go, yeah, sure. So they stopped ordering syndicated shows, paying for them, and they started taking these deals. And once Mattel and Hasbro had their initial run of success, then everybody tried emulating it. They would either build shows around existing toys. They would build shows around concepts that they hoped would then expand into toy lines. They would bring shows in from Japan or elsewhere that they hoped they could get enough interest that the toy line would come with them, and they flooded the market. So the syndication market had its blessings and it had its curses. And the blessings were there was a lot more freedom. There was a lot more ability to say things and do things that we couldn't do on Saturday morning. The curse was that it very soon just flooded itself out.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what writing have you been doing as of late to keep you busy?
Well, I have a short story coming out in a anthology in about a month's time called she's going to kill me now. Let me I'm Moonlight and Misadventure or something like that. I'll remember the name, of course, the moment it's clicked off. But the short story is called "Not a Cruel Man." It's a crime story. I've had a number of short stories, published. Had a couple in Analog, elsewhere. I'm working. I've got several projects that are in various stages of completion. I completed the first draft on a big project that I had been planning for literally over a decade and a half. And I just finished the first draft on that. I'm happy with the first draft. It needs to be trimmed by about 20,000 words. So I'm letting it lay fallow for a while before going back and hacking away at it. But I'm trying to keep busy. I do a lot of writing. I try to have a couple of things up on my blog, which is www.buzzdixon.com. Buzz Dixon is all one word. I try to have at least 2 things up a week on the blog. I'm on Facebook, wasting an inordinate amount of time. I'm on Twitter, wasting the time that I don't waste on Facebook. And I've been on Instagram every day. Usually late in the evening, I post a silly caption on top of an old illustration, and people seem to like that. So
okay,
I am trying to keep busy.
So I got a question here. If someone was to take your phone and look up your music playlist, what would they find?
Nothing. I don't keep music on my phone.
Oh.
So if you,
some people actually just listen to, another places.
So if you did have a music playlist, what would be on it?
I have very eclectic and oddball tastes. One of the great things about the internet is that I can listen to radio stations all over the country. I listen to a show called the Percy Trout Hour from I think it's WFM. No, it's not WFMU. Excuse me. Anyway, it's a college station out of Lexington. It has all kinds of oddball eclectic music on it. I listen to Webb Wilder's Americana playlist on Fridays whenever I get a chance. That's like a 2-hour top 40 of what they're now calling Americana music. They're trying to blend acoustic R&B, acoustic blues, and acoustic country, and even old time country like bluegrass. They're trying to blend this into a new musical genre called Americana music, and I like it a lot because it's very interesting to hear, somebody who is like from a white Southern background playing songs that reflect the same things that someone from a black urban setting is going through. And it's interesting to compare and contrast. There's more similarities than people realize. It's just the minor differences. But anyway, that's a show that I like a lot. I listen to the local classical music station quite a bit. At night, I turn on these YouTube channels that are the ambient coffee house channels. And it's like 8 hours of ambient background coffee house noise with a soft jazz soundtrack to it. And it's been very helpful in my productivity because it creates the illusion you're in an environment, there are people around you. You don't feel as isolated, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I'll listen to like just about anything and everything.
Okay.
Do you have any favorite like musical artists? If you have to name like 5.
Classical, Bela Bartok. Country, really old school, Hank Williams Sr. Rock and roll, you can't go wrong with the Beatles. I'm a big fan of what they loosely call surf music, which is like
Nice.
rock and roll instrumentals.
Yeah.
Big fan of that. As I mentioned before, Webb Wilder, he's got this genre rockabilly that he does that I I have all of his albums, all of his CDs. Been a big fan since the early '80s.
Okay.
So I'm all over the place. I mean, you hand me something and say, give this a listen. I'll give it a listen. If I like it, it stays on the list. So
does listening to music help when you have I don't know if it's a real thing. Some people say it's not writer's block.
I have rarely had writer's block. When I have had writer's block, it was typically the result of my brain telling me, no, this is a stupid project. We are not going to work on it. And, that's the typical writer's block for me. I will have occasions where I'm stuck for an idea. And when I am stuck, I just generally put that project down, move on to something else, and then the solution presents itself later on. There are two types, there are two extreme poles when it comes to writing. There's the plotter and there's the pantser, seat of the pants. And the plotters they develop their outline in great detail early on and they don't deviate from it. And the pantsers have an idea where they're going and they start. And if they get about halfway there and say, well, I'd rather do this instead. And then you just go off in that direction. Earl Stanley Gardner, who did the Perry Mason books, he was clearly a pantser because you're reading his books and he's dropping like all kinds of clues and red herrings here and there. And then he never pays off on half of them because he finally figures out what the story is and he just ignores all this other stuff that he's introduced. I mean, the stories are entertaining because you're interested in what Perry Mason is going to do, but they're not tightly plotted. They're just entertaining.
Yeah.
I listen to music, as I said, the ambient room sound music is a good psychological trick in just making me feel, well, I'm not alone. There's people around me, and it helps me. It helps relax the creative juices to write. But I write under a variety of circumstances. So.
Okay.
Well, that brings me to my next couple of questions here. When you're out and about, do you look at things and go, "Oh, that gave me an idea to write about"?
Yeah.
Do you have a story that you'd like to share? Maybe what's the the strangest place that you were like, "Oh, I got an idea."
Well, it is kind of hard to say. I mean, I was once driving down the freeway having a conversation with my wife, and a story idea popped into my head. And so I'm simultaneously talking to my wife, driving at 60, 70 miles an hour, and working out the beats of the story in my head, all at the same time. I'll see something. I mean, a classic example from the Thundarr show was we had written an episode where Thundarr, Ariel, and Ukla to cross a river, get on a raft ferry, and they're pulling themselves across, with a rope across the river. You've seen this in dozens of Westerns, Jack Kirby's doing the design work for us. He brings in this design for the raft that's an aircraft carrier deck set on top of a raft made of sequoias. And I said, we are not throwing this away as a background detail in a story. We're going to build a whole episode around that. And that became the Treasure of the Mox. So I see this great design that Jack did. And, I start thinking, well, how do we use that? What do we turn this into? What kind of a story would that support?
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example of something that I won't be able to use because I don't own the rights and I am not interested enough to try to track down who does own the rights and try to figure it out. The other day, I just dawned on me, a Popeye Indiana Jones crossover, that'd be a hell of a story, wouldn't it?
Okay.
That would be interesting.
I'm throwing my money now.
Yeah.
Fun, actually.
Yeah. But I mean, exactly. But I mean, you see, you can't do that literally because you have to track down the Popeye rights. You have to track down the Indiana Jones rights.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not in the mood for that, and especially when I can't have any guarantee that there's a payoff to it.
Yeah.
Years and years ago, I had, when I had an agent, I had an idea for a sequel to Forbidden Planet. And this was when Leslie Nielsen and Anne Francis were still alive. They could be brought back as those characters, now much older. And the premise was that the Krells had not died out. The Krells, when they had gained this new mental power, they had left this universe and gone to another universe. And now they're back and they're kind of pissed off that their planet was blown up and they're trying to find out who's responsible. And, I worked out the beats for this. I had a good idea for it, and nobody was interested. None of the people that held the rights were the least bit interested.
Yeah.
So
and I bet you, thinking back, they're like, we are kicking ourselves because, they could have been.
They aren't. No, they aren't. They lack, well, I'll take that back. For the most part, they lack the ability to see what went wrong and to figure out what the correction is. Hasbro kind of figured it out with the G.I. Joe and Transformers movies. After the fact, they recognized we tried to introduce brand new characters in these movies, and the audience for these movies did not want to see brand new characters. They wanted to see the characters they were familiar with doing stuff. And they recognized belatedly, if you're going to do a theatrical feature, don't try to make it a origin of a brand new cast story. Just, you can introduce new characters, but you've got to have your core characters there for your audience.
Yeah, like Transformers, not kill everybody in the first 15 minutes.
Yeah. I was indirectly responsible for that. I wrote the G.I. Joe movie, and they told me they were going to cycle a bunch of characters out of the toy line, which happened regularly. We wrote any number of characters out, that they either went to an alternate universe or they retired from the military or something like that. And they were planning to kill off Duke because they didn't realize just how much Duke was like one of the core characters they absolutely needed to have. And I said, well, we've been doing a war show all this time. We've never actually killed anybody. This is a movie. If we're going to get Duke out of the product line, let's kill Duke off. Let him die a heroic death and, noble sacrifice. And that gives everybody the impetus to go on and defeat Cobra at the end of the movie. And they said, great, write that scene. So I did. And Hasbro liked it so much, they told the guys doing the Transformers movie, hey, why don't you kill off Optimus Prime? Now, here's the difference. The G.I. Joe audience was about 12 years old, roughly. That was our target audience age. And a 12-year-old, if he's watching a war story, he knows intellectually people get killed in wars. And if you do a G.I. Joe movie and you kill off one of the characters, they intellectually at least knew that was a risk. They knew that was a possibility. Transformers was aimed at 9 to 10-year-old kids. And one of the chief differences is that the 9 and 10-year-old kids, they like peril, but they don't really want to see characters they beloved actually hurt.
Yeah.
Another difference was this. The 12-year-old could afford to go to the movies by themselves. They were old enough that most of them, their parents would just drop them off at the theater and pick them up later. A lot of the 9 or 10-year-olds, they had to come to the theater with their parents. So the parents have come to this movie. It looks like a hallucinogenic bad trip to them. They're just seeing colors swirling around. They have no idea what any of this means. The dialogue might as well have been in Urdu for all they could understand it. It makes no sense to them because they haven't been watching these characters for literally a year now on television. And the parents are in here and it's just noise and it's color and it's weird dialogue. And then all of a sudden, all the kids start screaming and weeping. And it's like, what's going on? And they're inconsolable. You can't cheer them up. They're just weeping piteously because Optimus Prime has been killed. And as I told Hasbro at the time, I said, look, you can take a robot, you can smash him, you can run him over with a steamroller, you can chop him into little bits, and then you can fix him. You can put him back together and he's as good as new. You can't do that with a person. Optimus Prime dying doesn't have the weight of Duke dying. Well, they freaked out the kids so bad. We had a case of one kid locked himself in a closet for a couple of days. He was so freaked out by it.
Wow.
So they arbitrarily changed the scene that's already been animated in G.I. Joe the movie to say that Duke isn't dead, he's in a coma, and then at the very end, we just got a call from Doc, Duke is out of the coma. Yay! I killed him. I killed him dead. But no.
Look, even as an adult, and this proved watching The Walking Dead, you can't choose a favorite character, otherwise, the next scene that they're dead. I got emotionally invested in that show the first 3 seasons, and when they killed off a couple of my favorite characters, I'm like, that's it, I'm done.
I forget the Western series that did this, but one Western series, as they went into production, they shot scenes of every character falling over, and it was like, you give us any trouble and this gets written into the storyline and you're out of here. And so they,
so much for job security.
Oh, the classic of that. I don't know if you've heard this story. And this is another Freddie Silverman extravaganza here.
Oh, boy. Here we go.
He approved this series called Cliffhanger, which was an anthology show based on the old serials. And there was a Western serial, a sci-fi serial, and the Western and the sci-fi serial were the same thing. There was a intrigue suspense serial. There was a Dracula serial, which was actually fairly good. And then there was this mashup of the West and sci-fi that was loosely based on Gene Autry and the Phantom Empire, which is like one of the weirdest serials ever made. But they do this serial where there's this underground city, and the actress they cast as the villainess was awful. And they realize, 2 episodes in, she is just terrible. She cannot carry this series. And so they got rid of her by having her character say in one scene, I'm tired of the way I look. I'm going to walk through the golden door and get a new look. And they literally had a door frame painted gold. She walks in on this side, they cut to the other side, and her replacement walks through. And that was it.
Huh. Wow.
Well,
I have to say the best character replacement anybody ever did was on the old George Burns and Gracie Allen show in the 1950s. They had a character playing the next door neighbor who would come over and have a scene with George Burns. And the actor playing the next door neighbor got a better gig, and Burns was generous enough to say, sure, yeah, go on and do that. So they shoot the scene this way. They start the scene, the character playing the neighbor comes in, they're having the dialogue, and in the middle of it, George Burns says, wait a moment. He turns to the camera, so this is so-and-so's last show. He's going on to another show. We wish him the best of luck. And this is so-and-so who's replacing him. And they bring out the replacement actor right there in the middle of the show and pick the scene up from there.
Wow.
So
I've never heard that story.
It's not like, the pilot was one person, and then when the season really started, then it was another person, or the end of the season, and then, wait a minute, why does...
Oh, yeah, the whole recasting.
Look at that 70s show with Lori. Mm-hmm. Just out of the blue, Lori just became this hot, totally different character, and it's like, wait, what happened to the other girl?
Roseanne's oldest daughter, Becky. That same thing happened. It's like, wait, what? It's a different person.
The opposite of that. Oh, excuse me. Go ahead.
Sorry. And what was it? It was an episode that kind of made fun of that whole thing where DJ is in therapy, older DJ is in therapy, and he's like, Becky is not who she used to be, or something like that.
The obverse of that is something that every other 80s horror film swiped from an old Abbott and Costello movie. And these low budget indie productions, they would need to have some kind of a name actor to get financing. So they would find some B or C level person who had enough of a name that they could get them on the box, but they couldn't afford the person full time. So they would hire him and they would shoot bumper scenes with them. But one of the scenes they would shoot would be him pulling on a mask, and then you hire somebody to be the masked killer for the rest of the movie. And then at the end, he pulls the mask off and reveals it was him all the time. And that goes all the way back to Abbott and Costello meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They cast Boris Karloff as Dr. Jekyll. And even in the early 50s, Karloff was not in the shape to play, an energetic character like Mr. Hyde. So they would have Karloff sitting at the desk, and then they would do this slow dissolve to a stuntman wearing the makeup. And then the stuntman runs amok, and then he comes back and sits down, and they dissolve back to Karloff. And so they'd make these low budget movies. They'd get one guy to show up for one day's worth of work and build a movie around that.
Boris Karloff's mummy will always scare the crap out of me, though.
Here's the last 4 movies that Karloff made were supposed to have been American-Mexican co-productions. And Jack Hill, who is a longtime B-movie director, writer, producer, Jack Hill wrote these movies in such a way that Boris's scenes could be filmed independently of the rest of the movie. And then they would go to Mexico and they would shoot around that and, edit it all together. Well, they took the project away from Hill. They shipped Karloff down to Mexico to shoot the scenes. Karloff just did not have the energy, and they didn't take care of him well enough. But they at least shot the scenes the way that Hill had written them. And Hill has been trying to get funding to remake those movies, cut out the cheesy Mexican stuff, and redo them the way he envisioned them. I don't know where that stands now, but the idea of
get the fans involved, and we can fund it in a day.
Yeah.
It would probably happen then,
Yeah.
Kickstarter.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's meant for Kickstarter right there. Yeah. So my last kind of big question for you, since you're a writer, what would you say to an aspiring writer like this one right here who has an idea and wants to fulfill it? What kind of advice would you give someone like that?
Well,
sit down and write.
Sit down and write.
Pretty much.
That's pretty much it. I'm focusing my attention now on prose, on short stories, on books, because I can control that process 100%. I send it out. They either like it or they don't, but it's mine. I don't have to jump through any hoops or anything. If you have an idea for a TV show or something like that, this is the cold, brutal truth of the business. You have to find somebody with money whom you can convince will make even more money by funding the project. People have asked me, says, why can't you do more Thundarr episodes? And the short answer is, you have to go to Warner Brothers. You have to find out who at Warner Brothers has Thundarr in their bailiwick, and you have to present them with an idea that to them is so obvious it's going to make money that they agree to let you do it. You have to do a lot of work to get to that point. And that's why I don't even try pitching to studios properties that they already own. If it's a series, yeah, I'll pitch an episode or something like that. I just don't want to waste my time working on other people's projects. If it's a game, develop it as fully as you possibly can. Try to find a gaming company that's interested, and be prepared to have to work with them on what their particular needs and insights are. Anything else? I mean, you see this? This is a movie studio right here.
Yeah.
People have been making feature-length films that have gotten theatrical distribution using just this. I tell young creators, just get your phone, go out and make a movie. They can't stop you. They can't prevent you from doing that. If you can't find a deal with somebody, put it on YouTube, put it on your own website, go and make another one. The reason movies cost hundreds of millions of dollars is because of corruption. They are laundering money. They are lining their own pockets. They are overcharging productions in order to siphon stuff off for themselves and their friends. There's no reason a clever filmmaker with a good crew can't go out and make, on a pittance, a good movie. There's a director named Sean Baker who's made he's made 3 films that I really find great. He made a film called Starlet. He made a film called Tangerine, and most recently he did a film called The Florida Project with William Dafoe.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was a great movie.
Oh, these are great movies, and they're wonderful stories. You're sitting there going in all of them. You're sitting there going, what's going to happen next? And it's not spectacle. It's just you get so wrapped up in the story, you're wondering what is going to happen next. You want to see what happens.
You're invested in the characters that they created.
Yeah, exactly.
And in a lot of that, though, it helps when you have one person who people hear Willem Dafoe and they're like, oh, well, I'll go see that, or I'll search for that movie, or I'll find it, or whatever. And then people tell other people and like, this is a really good movie. You have to see this movie. So I think that, I think the one thing that the pandemic did for a lot of us is give us an outlet for creativity.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a huge explosion in creativity over the next 3 years as projects that started during the pandemic start finding their way to their audience.
Because when we like back in, what year was it? Kevin Smith made Clerks, and not very many people saw it. And then all of a sudden it had a cult following, and then bigger studios bought into what he could create. And he did end up creating things that were, I don't want to say multi-million, but they made a nice chunk of money. But it was because people understood that kind of writing was going to come from this guy. And and he cast all of his friends in it. Like, it was people that he knew and people that were
Look
excited
how many movies he fixed with the script.
Well, and this is, I guess, paramount to what a lot of people were doing before. If they wanted to get out to create whatever they wanted to create. I have a friend from high school who was making his own movies with his buddies in the park and doing his own makeup effects and doing all these other things, and sent some of his pictures and some of his work into these studios and stuff. And he's gotten constant, consistent, work. And he might not win gajillions of dollars and he might not win awards, but he has work all the time.
Yeah.
So that says something about.
We
lost Buzz.
Our
guest.
I don't know. He might still be there. Buzz, are you still there?
Nope.
He might be back.
But I see what he was talking about. I mean, it's now like look at all the independent comic book writers and creators that we support with their Kickstarters. You know, independent works is where it's at now.
Yeah, definitely.
I think maybe because then they do control what they want to produce.
Yeah.
And I think that most people that are self-publishing and kickstarting and all that, they control what they want to produce. And they get to produce something that's real to what they want. So that was a good question to ask him.
Yeah. Man, this has been fun.
I have no good question for this.
And he said he'll be back. He just had.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I just had a something to take care of.
It's okay.
I was able to hear though, and yeah, this goes back to what I was talking about in my teen years in fandom. This was the mimeograph era. People would make fanzines, and some of them, I mean, the ones that I made as a teenager, I managed to get my hands on a spirit duplicator, and I just crank off these things, and they were very crude, and I think maybe 6 people total ever read my fanzines. But I could at least get some creativity out. I could at least express some ideas. Other people did fantastically wonderful things. We were talking about Tom Reamy a bit earlier. Reamy had this fanzine called Trumpet, and he followed it with another fanzine called Nickelodeon. And these were just great magazines. They were expertly designed. They had great art in them, great stories and articles. You can do that. You don't need somebody else's permission. You just have to put the work in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, we really appreciate that you decided to join us today. We loved having the conversations, and I try to keep the show at about 2 hours, and so
I know I'll keep you going for hours.
No, I mean, we laugh because we've gone 3 hours before.
It's not you; it's totally us.
Yeah, I mean, you're a very interesting guest, and we would definitely love to have you back on.
I'll be happy to come back anytime.
Yeah. So where can people find you? Is it BuzzDixon.com? Is that like the main hub?
You can find me on Facebook. I'm pretty hard to avoid. If you see this ugly mug, you found me on Facebook. I'm on Instagram as Buzz Dixon Writer. I'm on Twitter, I think, as Buzz Dixon Writer. I'm on. I have a blog. www.buzzdixon.com. So there you go. And as I said, I have every week on Tuesday what I call a fictoid short story goes up. I have I have these lined up through April of 2022. So every week there'll be a short story online on Tuesday.
Wow.
And I try at least once a week to add, something of, more general interest elsewhere. I just yesterday uploaded a review of the new Trotz and Bonnie compilation that came out. And if you're not familiar with Trotz and Bonnie, it was a great comic strip that originated in Underground Comics, moved over to National Lampoon. If you're familiar with it, you'll be really excited to know they've got a great volume out. If you're not familiar with it, you may want to brace yourself before you open the cover, because it's from the 70s, folks. That ought to be enough warning.
Can I say it's probably something very similar on the level of maybe like Fritz the Cat, or not that bad?
It's better than Fritz the Cat in that it's Sherry Flanagan was seeing things from a woman's point of view, and she has a much different point of view than many of the male artists, in particular Robert Crumb had. But it was certainly appearing in the same venues that Fritz the Cat was appearing in. And, and there are a couple that they don't dare reprint at this time because of changes in federal laws. So I'm not exaggerating. They did a couple, they would go way over the edge. So
Well, once again,
Good
Bud,
story.
thank you for joining us. I mean, after we go off, we'll continue our conversation here. But you're always welcome back on here. Even if it's not about your career. I mean, you're a movie fan, you're a writing fan, so just come on and join us with other guests and have a conversation, because that's what the show is about.
Happy to do that.
So before we
I
go,
just like listening to stories.
yeah, she loves bringing the guests on.
I never have any questions. I'm just like stories like this.
I mean, because the pandemic is what created this show.
Mhm.
So we've had wrestlers, we've had directors, we've had actors, we've had it all, and different walks of life have different stories, and so it's nice to hear all your stories.
It is by no means boring. It's just I'm sleep deprived.
No, I know that feeling.
You're a
As most
teacher.
mothers are. It's not even the teacher part of it. It's the mom part of it.
Well,
oh my God.
can we just give this lady applause, because she's about to wrap up her 16th year as a teacher?
Yep.
I don't know.
You are amazing.
I'm insane. That's what I am.
So let's run one more promo, the most important one.
I'm GW Pomager.
I'm Dina Marie.
I'm Sage Ia.
I'm Thomas Carter Rochester.
Hey, I'm David Thompson.
Hi, I'm Kevin.
And I'm Mia.
Hi, I'm Mark.
Hey there, this is Dave Adams.
Hi, I'm Rosemary Rose.
Jerome Conner here.
Hey guys, it's Josh Bauer.
Willow Schuyler.
I'm Cosplay Michael.
It's your boy Country.
I'm Ryan Permison.
And I'd like to ask you guys, please subscribe.
Please subscribe.
Please subscribe.
Please subscribe.
Please subscribe.
Please subscribe.
Please
subscribe.
Subscribe.
Please subscribe to HWWS
Web TV.
Great bunch of people.
and don't forget to smash the bell.
Ring that bell.
Smash that bell.
Hit that bell.
Hit the bell to be notified.
Hit the bell to get notified of new shows
and videos. You're going to want to do that, so do that soon.
So we can cross that 20,000 mark.
And get us to 100,000 subscribers
To 1 million and 10 million and 100 million.
on HWWS.
Web TV.
You really like it. I guarantee it.
Thank you.
As you can see, we're a part of a great network here of different shows, and one huge happy family.
we argue like family, that's for sure.
That wasn't that face wasn't intentional. The dog licked my foot, and it kind of freaked me out. So it wasn't like we are a bunch of crazy people, though.
Yes.
Yes.
And as every show ends, it's time to ring that bell.
Because